Okay, so another way of finding buoyant force was given to us by this guy named Archimedes. He was one of those Greek guys, those Greek philosophers like Socrates and Plato. He was very interested in this idea of buoyancy and why things float, and he did several experiments. And he came up with some terms that we need to know. One of those was displaced volume. I imagine that was in Greek. I don't know what it is in Greek, but we call it displaced volume, but this was from Archimedes. And he stated that when you have an object submerged in a fluid, that object will displace or make larger the volume of the fluid. This should be pretty intuitive. You've done labs like this, right, where I've told you to use the water displacement method to find the volume of the object, and this is exactly what Archimedes said. If I told you to find, for instance, the volume of a pile of rocks, you could fill a container up to a certain level, mark that level, add the rocks, and then you knew that how much more volume those rocks gave to that container, that fluid, you knew that was the volume of the rocks. So that whole thing is based on Archimedes here and this idea of displaced volume. And remarkably, he also found out that that amount of that fluid that is displaced is equal to that volume of the object, which is fairly intuitive, and you would think that's kind of a dumb moment, but I guess it wasn't. Sometimes, most of the time, objects aren't completely submerged as they're floating, and it displaces the amount equal to the part of the object's body that is submerged, okay? And this led him to this principle, Archimedes' principle, that any object completely or partially submerged in a fluid will experience an upward buoyant force that is equal in magnitude to the weight of the fluid displaced, okay, by that object. So the idea that the object displaces the volume, that's kind of intuitive and kind of makes sense. But Archimedes went a little bit further. He said also the buoyant force is going to be equal to the magnitude of the weight of that fluid, that displaced volume of fluid. And then a couple of housekeeping items. F sub B, capital B, is always buoyant force. And Archimedes' principle in terms of an equation and variables is that buoyant force, F sub B, is equal to the weight of gravity force, which you know as the weight of the displaced fluid. And in case you need a reminder, the weight of anything is its mass multiplied by its acceleration due to gravity, and that will give you the weight of the displaced fluid in newtons.